Colleagues, welcome back. And as you can hear, we are certainly using a microphone now. Welcome to those who are enjoying today's session, courtesy of live streaming. And can I just welcome most warmly Lisa Guernsey, who is going to be moderating our second panel. People will know that Lisa directs the project on early and elementary education policy in America, and I know, Lisa, that in a particular program of work at the moment you are focusing upon teaching and learning in a digital environment, particularly as the way in which we might be thinking about how we can more adequately meet the needs of our most disadvantaged communities. So we're seriously looking forward to this panel. Welcome, Lisa, and over to you as moderator.
Thank you so much, Tanya. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here. And again, big thanks to everyone, including, of course, Lynn, in this amazing report, this second part of this report. So I'm going to take a minute or so to introduce our panel, and we're going to dive into a much deeper conversation on the workforce. And this is something that in the United States, in particular, is an incredibly hot topic right now. There's a lot of interest, there's a lot of movement in particular states. There's also a lot of debate about how to do this and do this right in terms of improving supports for the workforce. This is something that Laura Bornfriend, who is the director, actually, of the Early and Elementary Education Program, is leading. Laura's here actually with us today. She has a team at New America that's looking very closely at a lot of issues related to workforce supports from those who are professionals from birth through age 8 space. And so we also have amazing experts here on our panel. Many of you, if you've been with us all morning, what a rich and amazing conversation we've been able to have so far this morning. You have already met Kathy Sylva, who is here representing England, and you've also met Kristiina, who is with Finland, and you've heard their incredible contexts and also progress that's been made in these two countries. But we also have some newcomers on stage with us this morning to really enrich this conversation about the workforce, and that's Albert Watt, who is here with the Alliance for Early Success, and Rebecca Gomez with the Heising-Simons Foundation. And we'll get into more of this towards the latter half of our 30 minutes here, but Albert and Rebecca are both leading the charge in many ways on how to think about new systems development for workforce supports across the variation of different types of teachers and professionals who are in that space. So it's really exciting to hear their reflections on this report. I want to start by just getting back into a couple of the specifics that we've learned from the two countries that are represented here. And I also want to note that there's so much to learn as well from the others that are represented in the chapters of the report. Before Kristiina, I go to you with a first question. I did want to ask, or to note how important it is to recognize the way that this book has organized its discussion of the workforce. So Lynn and Eva and others who are part of this have done, I think, a really tremendous service to us in helping us to understand this chapter 4, which is about knowledgeable and supported teachers and families. Really important that families are a part of that. But secondly, the next chapter that is still in this space and often doesn't get as much attention, I think, when we're talking about workforce, is on informed, individualized, and continuous pedagogy. It's about really looking at what's happening in our center-based care and classrooms with our children. And what does that guidance look like? What does it mean to really have a child-centered approach to learning? So it's exciting to be able to talk about both of those things on this panel. It's also a lot to cover in 30 minutes. Okay, so let me actually, sorry, Kristiina. First I was going to go to Kathy because I wanted to talk about kind of unifying structures and what we've learned from England about the importance of, and it sounds like this has been both a good thing in the UK and in England in particular, but also has its challenges, of really having a unified organizational structure for thinking about teachers and how they are both labeled, what we call teachers and how that matters, but also how that provides them with maybe some paths or some understanding of where they're going to move forward. So can you just tell us a little bit more about what that looks like in England?
Okay. In the United Kingdom, we have a occupational framework of qualifications. So level 1, you're qualified probably to the standard of doing a very repetitive task in a factory under constant supervision of another person. You're not qualified to do anything alone. Level 8 is PhD level. So the main grades for our early childhood workforce are level 6, which is undergraduate level, and level 3, which is the level that people get when they're 19 years old and they've been in some kind of vocational education. So these are the two main grades, but up until about 2005, we had, I think what you have, it was a catch-can system. Somebody said this is a diploma, but in North England, that wasn't a diploma. They had different numbers of hours, they had different amounts of supervised practice. So we went to a unified system using the national qualification framework that goes from 1 to 8, but we now have job categories basically around level 3, which you might call an assistant teacher. A person qualified to level 3 has had 2 years of training. It might be in what you might call a junior college. It might be in a vocational semi-college. And that person is qualified to lead a group of children on their own. They've had 2 years, they've taken exams, and I know Lynn asked us about competency-based, and our qualifications competency-based. They're a hybrid. They're part competence, but they're also part academic knowledge. Level 6, which is the other main grade of early childhood, have undergraduate degrees, and we have, but again, we have 2 kinds of teachers. One teacher, they both have undergraduate degrees because they're level 6. One is trained from birth to the age of 5, and the other is trained from 2.5 to 11. And it will not be surprising to any of you that the ones who are trained to 2.5 to 11 can work in primary schools. So they get the best salaries. So we have 2 kinds of teachers. They both have undergraduate degrees. They're both level 6. But one has a career option, which is to teach 6th grade. And also, the teachers who are trained 2.5 to 11 can become head teachers. And head teachers in England are very well paid, or they can be on the senior management team. So I don't want to take any more time. Different kinds of systems, but what really has made it so much easier for us, they have the same entry requirements, they have the same qualifications, although there will always be subtleties.
Very interesting, and obviously it's in a more centralized governance system, as we learned earlier, so that plays a role there, but what our states in the United States might be able to do with that information, as well as at our national and federal level, I think there's a lot to think about there. So Kristiina, I want to turn to you, and this is to shed some more light on how in Finland there is this focus on pedagogy, but also on what's been title, or perhaps I think it's the title from Finland, of the individualized educational plans for each child. And I think that would be something that would be helpful for the audience to understand and think about in the context of other countries.
Okay, thank you. Yes, in Finland, I have been already emphasizing the personalized way how we try to serve families and children. And these individual educational plans are a concrete materialization of such an effort. Now it is legally binding that all, whether public or private ECEC services, they need to co-create an individual educational plan for each child. This plan draws on the local curriculum and national curriculum framework, but it is personalized in the sense that the teacher, early childhood education teacher, together with the guardians and appropriately with the child, together design the year's plan for the child. The individual educational plan is drafted and visited twice a year, and it takes place, parents or guardians and the child come and meet the teacher. Usually this meeting lasts 20-30 minutes, pretty typical, and together there is a format that teachers can follow, and they can discuss about the child's strengths, interests, so observe positive things, not only what the child cannot yet do, but also what the child is good at and likes to do. And then you also start to talk about the goals and wishes that parents would like to have and the child is eager to learn or just do while at early childhood education and care. In Finland, we do not have specific learning or developmental goals in early childhood education for each child. That is even different from the UK. Of course, health-wise, and when children and families visit the doctor, physician, like health doctors, they monitor child's health and overall kind of development. But when it comes to learning goals or achievements, we don't specify them at early years. Actually, this type of specification begins during first grade when children are 7 years old. But this individualized educational plan has been now in Finland for about 3 years, and teachers need a lot of support, obviously, and we hinted here when we began something about the possibilities digitalization can offer. So there are now different applications being developed where these plans can be drafted and appropriately and safely perhaps shared and documented to develop a portfolio for each child. Taking care of all the kind of personalized data protection and all these issues. So digitalization may have a lot to offer to provide templates and multimodal documentation. So not only written text, but also pictures and plans that are set for each child. But this is what is very much now emphasized, and it's like the general framework, then the local curriculum, and each child kind of have their own unique curriculum,
right,
designed in Finland.
So those are two really kind of important new sources of data points for us when we're thinking about some lessons to learn from these two countries. Let me get one more kind of set of data out from both of you, and then we're going to move to Albert and Rebecca. Making sure that the teachers with children have the skills and knowledge base to be able to do something like individual education plans, to be able to hit the measures that are needed for the different levels. We want to better understand how your countries are set up to provide that teacher preparation, whether it's at the pre-service level in your universities, as well as in service or continuing professional development. So I know there's a lot in that question, but if you could, both of you, just tell us a little bit about what the systems look like for preparing teachers in your countries.
I think I've explained that we have undergraduate trained teachers and we have teachers who are trained for a 2 or 3 year course, which is not a degree. I think I'll speak about professional development of continuing teachers. You see, Finland, it's a piece of cake because they have a very highly skilled workforce, very competitive to be accepted on the courses. For us, it's more like you. We have a lot of low-paid teachers working in private daycare centers, and they have to have a level 3 if they're in charge of a room, but there will be people with level 2 in that room as well who is supervised by the level 3. So for our biggest challenge, and I wish I could give you our success story, I can only tell you what we're planning. We've decided that we really have to invest more in professional development of teachers in service. And we don't worry so much about our degree-trained teachers, level 6. They actually are quite well trained, and they get, the ones in the public system, which is about 25% of our children, get well paid. But it's the teachers in the private, mostly they have children, babies and toddlers, and they're in low-paid jobs. So we're really investing in using IT. We have, the government has a whole variety of new programs. We're trialing them now. We're a country that's very interested in data. We make decisions on data. So we have new systems of in-service training for the lower skill, the lower qualified teachers, but very much so that if you would go home and you would look online at 3 short sequences of teachers in another classroom, maybe in another state, and then you would have activities, you would get together in a chat room with other people. So we're really looking at how we can use IT, because the biggest, if I had money in my country, because I didn't get asked that lovely question, I would really do something for serving teachers who have low skill and low pay, and I would really do something very innovative and wonderfully fun.
Fantastic.
Oh.
And Kristiina.
Yes, thank you. In Finland, we have 3 types of professions working in early childhood education and care. In center-based care, we have bachelor level early childhood teachers, and 1/3 in each center needs to have such professionals who have this bachelor's degree. 2 other professions who work in Finland are social care workers, who can be called nurses. They have a vocational education degree. Sometimes it may also be called bachelor's degree, but it is not from a university. And then we have assistants that require at a minimum like high school education. In Finland, we have invested heavily on teacher education, initial teacher education, and as already described, it is a popular profession still, but we invest heavily on continuous development of our kind of initial teacher education programs, integrating research and practice. So not only practice or competence-based learning, but also trying to educate reflective practitioners who are able to draw on recent research evidence to also make continuous research in their classrooms. Professional development is very important in Finland, and new models are being developed. We know by our research data that teachers and other workers in daycare centers are very keen to take part in professional development courses and programs, and we have ample of them. They are also governmentally supported. What is unique, I know that you want to stop, is that many now Facebook groups, social media, teachers themselves are now eagerly sharing what they have developed, what they have learned. So nobody's actually steering them. They have organized themselves from the ground. And I find this very, very fascinating. And this also shows how creative teaching profession is in Finland. Teachers are very proud to invent new things. They are really designers of pedagogy. And these innovations are there to be shared, and they are very proud of their learnings and are eagerly taking part in these social groups that work online. That's an interesting phenomena and worthy of research attention in the future.
Oh, I think so. And maybe in lots of other countries that's happening as well. It needs to be documented. Interesting. So let's go over to Albert and Rebecca. And it's just a very open question. What lessons can we be learning, and what insights are you taking from these countries and the others that are outlined in the book?
Great, thank you, and thanks Lynn and others for having me here. This is fascinating. And so I have 2 things that I think the United States can learn from these countries, and I think in many ways we're moving in that direction. And then 2 things that I think the United States can kind of learn with these countries, because I don't think that anybody has really cracked these nuts. So the first thing in terms of what we can learn and I think we're moving towards is this idea of a more unified framework for degrees and credentials that are associated with the various roles and workforce roles and designations. And you just said that in Finland there are 3 positions you can have in the early care education system. I don't know if you noticed anybody's minds being blown in the audience from the US, like that is unheard of in the United States. So if we can get to that point, even within a state, that would be wonderful. Right now, as a professional, if you're going to the early childhood education world, you can be at lots of different things, and you know, it's different when you're in the public versus private, in infantile versus preschool, you know, different funding stream, childcare versus pre-K, and then when you go out and move into another state, that's in a whole other story. So that is a direction that I think is really promising, and we hope to learn from both Finland and England on that. And in England, it sounds like you start where we're starting from, and you moved into a more unified framework, so that's great. The other is that in all the countries that that we read about in the book, that it seems, you know, my read of it is that everybody has higher expectations in terms of for the lead teachers in early child education in terms of the degrees and credentials and competencies. And I actually thought maybe that we can learn a little bit more from the Asian countries, because my read, the Asian countries have less formalized education requirements and are moving into, you know, trying to professionalize their field, just like we are. And I also wonder about the opportunities that opens up when you have a more professional, more rigorous prepared profession, like in Finland. And think about, in terms of our context, like when you think about monitoring in the licensing or quality rating improvement systems in our system, rather than, you know, focusing on kind of more basic issues around the environment or even practices that how that might open up some opportunities in terms of really focusing on pedagogy and things like the individual educational plan that you guys are required teachers to have. So then the 2 things that I think we can learn with you guys is this idea of competency-based credential in education, and we are really trying to figure out, you know, even when there's a requirement for a BA in early child education, is it really providing the competencies that we need for the teacher? So I think that is an important lesson that we can learn from. I think England and Singapore, I think, is the other one that's really moving in this direction. And then compensation. Everybody trying to figure out how to pay for higher compensation. I read some strategies around using salary scales. In some countries they use incentives, like if you adopt a curriculum, I think in South Korea, if you adopt curriculum, then you get more money to pay your teachers more. So how do we learn from those kinds of strategies to improve our workforce compensation? So I'll stop and hand it over to Rebecca.
Thanks. Thank you for having me, Lynn. It's truly an honor. When I talk to people about lessons we might learn about early childhood from other countries, I often get sort of a glazed look. Some of that I think is real. We are a federalist democracy. We're a very large country. We'd like to do things in our own way. Some of that I do think is American exceptionalism. But our destiny is not manifest around early childhood. And I do think that there's quite a lot that we can learn about early childhood from these countries. We can learn, we can adapt, we can innovate. And so I think one of the things in particular we can think about is how to change our prevailing attitudes about education and about teachers in this country, and think about how we convert that from a low-paying, low-respect job into a high-paying, high-respect profession. So I have 5 things that I want to share, and I know our time is short, so I will be succinct. I think the first thing is that each of these countries has taken their system building process as a whole. And I think if I can use the parlance of my generation, we like things in America that are trending, and so we often pick one system element to focus on, and focus on that in isolation of the other system elements. And so I think what Lynn talked about and what our other PIs have talked about here is building a system in total. We won't get to an effective workforce subsystem without also thinking about governance, financing, and the other elements. So I think for me, that's the biggest takeaway, and we can learn from these countries about how to do that and how to think about that. The second thing is that we have to be really careful. Albert, you talked about how we have these low and uneven requirements. Lisa, you also talked about that in the US. And as we engage in workforce development, system building, which is very hot right now, we are in danger of creating a two-tiered system and reifying that system. And we have to be really careful that we don't do that. Because with a two-tiered system, you then have teachers that are haves and have-nots. And that has implications for how much teachers can earn. It has implications, I think, for retention and recruitment, which then translates to what happens in the classroom, right? Because with high turnover and the lack of continuity of care, the kids are not getting the benefits that we want for them. So that's the second thing, is we need to be really careful not to create a two-tiered workforce system. And I think these countries have implications that we can think about there. The third is this issue of competencies. So I totally agree with Albert. We need to think about this as a way to prepare teachers. So thinking about how we link the competencies to preparation, both formal and informal, thinking about people who have been in the workforce for a really long time and might have these competencies. So what are the mechanisms that we can put in place in our system, and what can we draw from these other countries to help us think about how to create competency-based preparation and link compensation to that competency-based preparation. The fourth is this notion of a differentiated staffing model, and that could, I think, help us think about how we preserve the existing workforce, bolster their preparation, and bolster their compensation. And so one thing that I really liked, Kristiina, you talked a little bit about this, but I read more about it in the book, is this notion of these multidisciplinary teaching teams, right? Where you have a differentiated staffing model, and you have these teaching teams and these staff that work together to think about how you implement that IEP. And then that also, is great for the kids. It's great for the workforce in terms of having a differentiated approach. And it also, if you look at some of the research that others have done around the isolation in the early childhood workforce, it breaks that up, right? You've now got a team of people that you're working with to benefit the classroom and benefit those children. And then the last is this notion of comprehensive career pathways. And we've worked on this a little bit in the US, but we have a long way to go. And many of the countries have done a lot of work on this, and so I think we could draw from that and learn some lessons there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are getting short on time, but I really want to make sure that I hear both Albert and Rebecca your reflections on this, and hopefully yours as well, Kristiina and Kathy. One of the really important points that was raised at the very beginning by Lynn in her presentation, and is throughout the book, is honoring the context of the country and the diversity of the children population, the diversity of the families in those countries, and thinking about the diversity of our teachers as well, and their backgrounds and their ways of using their own backgrounds to help teach children. So given that, we are in a time and place where there are more and more challenges coming up all the time because of that variation, but also more and more opportunities for learning and teaching in new ways. How would you tackle this problem / opportunity where we have so many needs among our student populations, our children populations, in terms of diversity of language development, poverty, certainly their migration patterns, and what can we be learning from this workforce conversation to make sure we're helping all kids?
So do you want me to start?
Yeah.
So I think this is a really important issue, and I want to start by saying in this country, in the United States, our diversity is our strength, and that bears repeating given our current political context. Our diversity is our strength. And so what I noticed about the study countries is that they've embraced pedagogical orientations that value and lift up their ethos, their country ethos. And so we have the opportunity to do that here with that statement I just said. To do that effectively, of course, you need teachers that are prepared to work with all kinds of families and all kinds of children. And you need teachers that are supported and compensated themselves. And so it goes back to, I think, my first point about focusing on the system in total, and keeping our ethos of a diverse nation that welcomes all individuals at the heart of that systems building. So I know that's very aspirational, but I think that's where we are right now.
So I think I'll take a little bit of a difference. I do obviously believe also that diversity also strength. I'll come back to that a little bit. In the United States, we are, as many people know, we are going through a lot of changes demographically around race, around language, and cultures, and also just more inequality in terms of income. So we have a lot of kids in the 0 to 5 space that have a lot of challenges, and I want to make sure I say that it's not the kids who are presenting the challenges. It's the systems, political and policy systems in which the kids live that are presenting these challenges, right? So we have learned a lot about the research around implicit bias, and as our country becomes more diverse, I think that is really important. We've learned a lot about the impact of poverty and trauma and what that does to children's ability to learn, and there's a lot more research on those kinds of practices. Dual language learners is a huge issue, and I don't think we have a long ways to go in terms of just valuing home language and multilingualism in our country. So given all that, I do think that there is a lot of strength in the workforce that we have now, as sort of chaotic and messy as it is right now. We have a lot of teachers who look like the kids that they serve, who come from, in many cases, who come from the community they serve. But I would argue that even with those strengths, we haven't really maximized the strength of that diversity, because our country has not really figured out, and states and federal government has not figured out how to systematically support the competencies of that workforce to serve the kids, the diverse kids, and all those things that I mentioned fully and well. And I think we have examples of when we invest in resources and pathways for the incumbent workforce to attain higher levels of preparation, that they can do it. It's not a matter of can, it's a matter of investing in those pathways and resources and really be intentional about how to do that and really scaling what we know works. So.
Excellent. I know we really are out of time, but I don't want to leave without just hearing from Kristiina and Kathy very, very briefly your thoughts. I know diversity in your student and child populations is something that you're both tackling, and just any final thoughts on this?
Definitely. Currently in Finland, we are discussing how to attract diversity in those young people who want to become early childhood teachers. I would say they now are currently kind of very similar, who want to become early childhood teachers. So we are hoping to also attract students who perhaps represent different cultures and languages. And when it comes to diversity, not only language and culture, but special education needs, we already have programs for teachers to specialize in special education needs, and we have those teachers serving now in our early childhood centers as well. So I would say multi-professional work is important when we try to serve children who also may be suffering from some sort of developmental delays or issues around their well-being. But of course, multicultural issues and cultural diversity is then another issue. But these issues surround our education system, and we try to develop also in these respects.
And Kathy?
I'll use this one because I know it works. I think Nirmala talked about the Gini coefficient, and I love these kind of very short, sharp measures. There is another measure, which is the difference in any country between educational attainment of those who speak the dominant language and those who speak other languages. England is really excellent on this score. We have very, very little difference between native English-speaking children. And how do we do it? The normal London classroom has 16 languages. So we have such diversity. We have Africans, we have people from Europe, we have people from Latin America, Asians. We do it not by teaching the home language. We can't. If you have 18 languages, you can't do it. So we do it by respecting the home language. And every one of our classrooms truly respects all the languages. We invite people to come in and talk, parents, religious leaders, and that's how we do it. And we get the parents, we say we don't have time to teach Urdu in grade 1, but you can do it at home. So really think hard about how much you have to put in technically supporting that other language and how much is really in hearts and minds and respect.
Thank you so much. Please join me, everybody, in thanking our panel.
And Lisa, thank you very much. A superb panel.